What is up, modern drummer? Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a really simple series today, but a continuation from the throne height and the pedal ergonomics. We're going to talk about snare drum ergonomics today. And it's some simple steps, but just some quick important information to make sure you have your snare angle and height in the right position for you. Honestly, guys, before we get into this, make sure you check out the previous article series so we can dive right in and make sure that everything below the waist is perfect for you. Anyway, let's jump right in. All right, guys, step one is really simple. All we're gonna do is erase the dogma. Now, there isn't a lot of dogma as to where you should put your snare drum and instruments on the floor, but what there is a lot of sound bites that are out there, like have your arm at 90 degrees, have this grip, this is how much you should bring your sticks back, and all that stuff. Simply put, that stuff may help you, but it doesn't matter. What really matters is it your body's specific range of motion? How much range of motion do you have based off the shape of your bones and your muscles? All right, drummers, so the external components that we're gonna be dealing with today, we're gonna be talking about all of the floor instruments, including the snare drum, the floor toms, and auxiliary snare drums if you have one. Now, there are other floor instruments that you may have. These are the only ones that we're gonna be covering today. Now, keep in mind that the previous articles we've discussed with drum throne height and pedal placement will help you determine where everything should start, at least from the floor side of things, and how high you should be sitting. So if you haven't checked those out, go back and check those. As far as the internal components go, we're going to be talking about the wrist and hand and the associated bones. So of the system, what we have is we have the ulna, the radius, the carpal bones, and then all of the little finger digits that are going to come off of that. Now, for the sake of today, we're not going to get super specific with the name of these bones, but to help you give you a visual, we've got one bone here, a second bone here, carpal bones, and the finger bones. Now, like we talked about in the article, you guys can see, relative to other bones that we might have in the skeleton, this is a relatively fragile system. I mean, these bones are not exceptionally large, and there's a high opportunity that these things could get injured. So it's important for us to understand the mechanics of this system just a little bit. Now, one of the things I talk about in the article series that'll be important for us to know is that how much range of motion we have when we start choosing where our instruments will be and what angles we should be at will be determined at what grip we choose and how our hands are. Firstly, before we jump into that, keep in mind, guys, if you have bigger hands and smaller hands, that'll help you determine what kind of drumstick size you should have. Music aside, if you have smaller hands, you should consider using smaller sticks. If you have bigger hands, you should consider using bigger sticks. Now, what we are going to talk about, though, is with this system, we have a few different motions that are important that relate back to drumstick playing, but will also relate, more importantly for us today, back to active range of motion assessment to help us find these, where these instruments should be. So what we're going to do is I want you to put your arms at your side, and I want you to do a thumbs up karate chop-like position. Now, when we pronate or turn our palms down, all these carpal bones turn down, and we have the radius that crosses over the ulna. So that looks something like this. So you guys can see that bone crosses over the radius. Now, when that happens, that actually starts to change how much range of motion we can have. So how do we show that? Check this out. So if we're here, I want you guys, with your hands, to do wrist flexion, just like so, and then wrist extension. And then what we're going to do is pronate, like we were holding a drumstick, and then try to do wrist flexion and wrist extension. Now, it may not be a massive difference, but you might notice that when you have your palms facing, you have a lot more range of motion with the flexion side of things, and when you're pronated, you have less. And alternatively, which we really don't get to unless you're a traditional grip player, when you're supinated, you'll actually even have less range of motion. Why is this significant? When we get to actually the assessment part today, it's going to be important that you guys have an idea of what grip you use. If you're a thumbs up French grip player, palm down player, all those are going to help to determine what angle and where your drums should be. For the assessment process, we're going to keep it pretty simple today. There are a couple things that are important for me to share with you over the camera. One, make sure your throne and pedal placement is ideal. We want to make sure everything below the waist is in a comfortable, customized position for you. Now, what I want you to do after that, place the instruments at a neutral position. It even could be where you have them placed right now. Then what we're going to do, I want you to grab a set of sticks and grab the sticks with whatever grip feels most natural to you. Don't force anything. Now, What we're also gonna do is figure out basically how much range of motion you have, but also when you bring your sticks down, when are your sticks parallel with the ground, which we're gonna talk about with Newton's laws of reaction force just in a second. So first off, pick your associated grip and just check to see how much wrist active range of motion you have. I'm turning my torso and turning towards the center of each drum that's here, just to get a sense of where I am. And a small tidbit, if you have an auxiliary snare drum and a floor tom, putting aside hi-hat and other floor instruments, they should be relatively close to the same position. Here's what's important. If you play thumbs up French grip and you do your range of motion assessment and you do palm down, you might notice that I have a lot more range of motion with my palms down grip than I do with my thumbs up grip. Very important, because if you guys are trying to put instruments, especially when we get to the secondary toms, it's going to be important to make sure you're working within your active range of motion. Now lastly, and this assessment's pretty simple, but I want you guys to be aware of what angle your instrument should be at, and this is going to transfer to everything else that we're going to talk about when we set up the instrument. Now, I always suggest not always that your arm should be at 90 degrees, because that is kind of a dogmatic sound bite. But what we are going to do is we want to make sure that when we hit the drum, that we do have a 90-degree angle to the surface of the drum. So when I hit the drum's going to create a reaction force between me and the drumstick and the drum, and it's going to shoot the stick back. If I have the drum at a crazy angle, for example, if I have the drum angled upwards like so, like some people do, some stereotypical rock drummers may have, when I hit the drum, my wrist very well may be in an extended position like so, which means that all those reaction forces are going to come back into my joint and cause a lot of pressure at the wrist, which can lead to injury. So try to not necessarily have flat instruments like mine are. Like you might notice my floor instruments kind of tapered a little bit more toward me. So when I hit it, I have a 90-degree angle between the stick path going down towards the drum and the drum pushing me back like so. Helps me make sure that I'm working within my active range of motion and that the forces are not pushing me further than I can go to help me make sure that I don't get injured. Simply put, guys, this is probably an easy step. Make sure your sticks are in a comfortable position, check your range of motion, make sure your angle's correct, make sure that when you check your motion that you have enough extra range of motion that the wrists are not pushed back into a dangerous position, and then adjust to taste. Keep in mind, if you are a traditional player, you do have different options and some more limitations. You're going to have less ability to bring the stick up if you're keeping your hand closed and controlled, but you also have more extension that you can go into, which very well may modify what position you have the snare drum. Reaction forces is one of the most important things we need to consider with the drum kit and where we position the snare drum. Now, this isn't going to necessarily modify where you position the snare drum a lot, but what we need to be aware of is when I take this drumstick and I bring it down to the drum, when I hit the drumstick, there is a force vector of the tip of the drumstick that is going at a perpendicular angle to the head. So I have the drumstick going like this, and 90 degrees to the drumstick there is a tangent, and the tip of the drumstick will hit the drum, and then it'll bounce back towards me, or have some force back towards me. Why this is important is if you're not working within your active range of motion, and you're kind of violating your settings a bit by having the snare drum too high, including the rim being too high, or the angle's too high and you have no more range of motion left, that means that all the force you hit into the snare drum, minus the forces that the head absorbs, will push right back into your wrist and can irritate the soft tissue of the wrist, which is exactly how drummers get tendonitis and carpal tunnel syndrome and ganglion cysts from their snare drum. Now keep in mind, I urge you to play with the height of the snare drum once you get this all figured out with the active range of motion stuff. Make sure, if you want to play rim shots, that your rim is high enough that when you hit the rim, your thigh's not in the way and you're not digging down fighting for it, because that has the opposite problem where you're kind of pushing down and forcing the wrist into extension and potentially could hurt. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. The goal of the series is just to get you being aware of what your wrists are doing and considering reaction forces. And I'm looking forward to talking to you more and finishing up this article series with the last two pieces of putting everything else on the kit. So let's build the drum kit, guys. Please, if you have any questions, reach out to me at drummechanics.com, email Modern Drummer, and let's stay healthy.